Hey, good morning. It's Paige Browning. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You're vaccinated now, you meet a friend who you haven't seen in a while, and you have this awkward moment where you have to decide if you're going to hug. This has happened a few times to me over the summer, and it can be weird. UW professor Nicole McNichols is here today to help us navigate hugging people again. But first, let's get you caught up. Here's where we are in the pandemic. Hospitals throughout Washington are the fullest they have been since COVID arrived. 94% of people hospitalized with COVID have not gotten a vaccine. The state's Department of Health is pleading with people to get vaccinated to lower the stress on hospitals. And sports stadiums are responding to the spread of Delta. Masks are mandatory in the indoor areas at all upcoming OL Reign and Sounders games at Lumen Field, the Storm games in Everett, and Ems games at T-Mobile Park. You might remember the Seattle Public Libraries stopped collecting late fees last year. Well, that had a big impact. More than 50,000 library accounts were reinstated after the change. That's according to the library's annual report, which just came out. And for all you ebook readers, the library system's digital collection is now 35% bigger than it was in 2019. And a question I never thought I'd be asking: is it legal to put a naked baby on the cover of an album? Spencer Eldon, who lives in California, says it's sexual exploitation. Spencer is the baby on Nirvana's famous Nevermind album. He's 30 now, and he's suing the band. No response from Nirvana so far. Now, here's Patricia Murphy.
Vaccines have allowed people to be physically close enough to hug again, but after a year of separation, not everyone's into it.
I don't know. I'm not much of a hugger.
I'm a hugger.
It depends on the person. First time I saw them when they came to town, I'd give them a hug, but I might not give them a hug until they left again.
I'm less likely to want to hug people I don't know very well.
I didn't necessarily grow up with hugs, but I want to have hugs part of my daughter's life.
It seems like just yesterday we were walking around trying to keep to our bubble, but now a lot of us are remembering, or in some cases realizing, how much we need to be touched. Nicole McNichols is here. She's a UW psychology professor of human sexuality who knows an awful lot about hugging. Nicole, good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, Patricia.
Are you a hugger?
I am a huge hugger. Yes, absolutely. I've got 3 children and a husband who I hug all the time, and I like to bring it in a lot. Yeah.
You know, I didn't grow up as a hugger. I came to it late in life, and now I realize I take my cues from other people more often than I just go in for the big hug.
Absolutely. Well, I think that that's so important too, because now with, this sort of increased focus on consent, I think that's really an important thing to do. And I always kind of look at someone and say, can I hug you, before I actually go in for the hug. So
yeah, I'll do the arms wide open thing. Like,
yep, me too.
I'm offering this.
Yep. It's all yours if you want it.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting was for 18 months, we were told it was dangerous to be close to each other. And I wonder what kind of impact that had on people, what that did to us.
I think that will have, a lasting impact, because for a while, we know that touch, for example, human touch is related to all sorts of really important positive health outcomes, ranging from blood pressure to heart disease to depression, stress, anxiety. It's even been found to negatively correlate with personality disorder symptoms. So in other words, making people, who do struggle with severe mental illness, human touch has been found to kind of mitigate and soothe those symptoms. So I think that it's been really tough on a lot of people. And I think getting that message that it's dangerous to touch others has certainly taken its toll as well.
We are still in the middle of a pandemic here, even though things have opened up just a little bit with vaccines. The Delta variant is really, really messing with our ability to recover, to make it through this virus. Hugging, again, is a bit of a risk and everyone is in a different place. I wonder if we're in this "are we going to hug" moment with each other.
Yeah, and I think that is really going to come down to kind of the individual cost benefit analysis that each individual does, right? It's not that I'm not terrified of the Delta variant. It's out there. It's something to, certainly be worried about. But I think what has to go into this calculus is just how fundamentally important human touch is to our mental well-being and even to physical health outcomes that seem like they have nothing to do with mental health. So I think that that's kind of part of the equation. Now, for somebody who's not vaccinated, maybe can't get vaccinated, or if you don't know if someone's vaccinated, I expect that we'll continue to exercise maybe a little bit of constraint or just sort of think about it. But I do hope that if people feel safe, if they are vaccinated, if they know others are vaccinated, that they will make a conscious effort and be intentional about trying to introduce touch back into their life, because I do think it's incredibly important.
And we talked a little bit about this earlier about, me giving my open-armed cue about offering a hug versus just taking a hug, because there is a pretty new conversation about consent.
Absolutely. As I tell my students, sometimes this new conversation about consent doesn't go over so well with grandma and grandpa who come in and want their hug. And if you're trying to, teach your children that, and especially from a very early age, it's so important to teach children that they have sort of a right to their own personal boundaries. They have a right to their own personal body sphere. Nobody should feel the right to come in and essentially violate that unless they have the express permission of the child. So, sometimes this means explaining to grandma and grandpa, you can't just go up and hug your grandchild. You need to, do the open arm thing where you try to gauge how interested they are first. I think that for every age, though, this idea of consent is just so important to respect and acknowledge and understand. And it introduces this idea of, okay, well, I have to make sure I'm going about this in a way that respects people's boundaries.
So obviously, we've spent the better part of a year being weary of touching each other. In some cases, it's dangerous. How has that changed our conversation around consent when it comes to hugging?
I think it's really strengthened that conversation. I think that you have to take into account that it's not just your health and safety that is being called into question. Maybe when you go and hug somebody, you have to think about that person's safety level. I think we almost have to double down on our efforts to clarify that somebody is actually happy about the idea of being hugged.
Yeah. And like you said, vaccination status really factors into that these days.
It sure does. And just remember, just because somebody says, yeah, I'm vaccinated, doesn't mean that you can just go in for the hug and not ask them. Even if it's for just personal reasons that they just still feel frightened, you have to respect that. It's so important just to allow there to be consent and encourage people to voice whatever their personal boundaries are.
And of course, if they're not vaccinated, that is an entirely different conversation.
Yes, it sure is. It sure is. And again, then it's up to you. But I would not be surprised if many people feel less inclined to go in for a hug with a person who's not vaccinated. Yeah.
And of course, there are a lot of people who are extremely glad nobody is expected to hug anyone anymore. Some people weren't big huggers even before the pandemic. We spoke to a Pacific Northwest-based poet, Shin Yu Pai. She's Taiwanese American, and she's not super comfortable with hugs right off the bat.
I think it depends on this kind of level of intimacy or knowing someone. Like, I just don't feel comfortable hugging some people. I don't think it makes me frigid or unaffectionate or cold in that kind of, stereotypical way that people tend to perceive Asian Americans. It's just, I don't want to hug everybody. I think it's okay to say that.
I wonder if the pandemic could make it more accepted that people don't want to touch.
I think it's definitely going to make it totally more socially acceptable to not want to touch, to not want to hug. Also, one thing that I'm going to admit that I'm a little grateful about is that it's not going to be assumed that you're going to go shake somebody's hand, because that does make me personally feel a little bit more at risk, just because, you cough, you cover your mouth with your hand. It just seems like a really easy way to pass germs. So I might keep the elbow bump.
It's going to be interesting to see where we all land as a culture on this, because everything has changed. We are different people on the other side of this pandemic, and we're not even on the other side of it yet. So to be determined where we end up, I am curious if there are people who feel like they do need more touch, but are not really into the giant hugging thing. Where is that middle of the road for them?
So there has been a lot of research on that too. One of the things that's shown really positive benefits is massage. And it doesn't have to be somebody who is even necessarily a physical therapist, but just any kind of massage that you might go in for. If you're into things like manicures or pedicures or facials, if that's your thing, that can offer types of touch too.
Even a haircut.
Even a haircut. I think this is why we confess all of our deepest, darkest secrets to our hairdressers. There's something. Seriously, my hairdresser knows so much about me. I mean, there are major opportunities for blackmail there. But I think that it's very intimate, even if it's not somebody who you see every day in your life. And there, things like weighted blankets now can kind of offer that sort of cocoon feeling. And there's a lot of research with pets. So having a dog or a cat that you snuggle up with, those things can also introduce elements of touch, or something that simulates the effects of touch that can really help a lot of people.
Yeah, fascinating. There's so much vulnerability when we touch each other.
Yes, I think there really is. And I think it's interesting because it's not just that we vary as individuals in terms of how much we want touch, but I find I even vary day to day or even hour by hour. Sometimes I'm in the mood to touch and I'm in the mood for a hug, and sometimes I just kind of want my quiet time, and maybe I'm in work mode or just, having that kind of a day where I don't want touch. So I think there is, we're allowed to have variability, and we're allowed to sort of allow ourselves to change.
Yeah, fascinating conversation. Even maybe reaching out and just tapping someone on the arm to say, hey, I'm here and I hear you is enough sometimes.
It really is. And also there's a really interesting study where they found that if you make a request of someone and then gently kind of tap them on the elbow, kind of like a soft embrace, that person is more likely to go along with your request than if you don't, right? So there's your tip of the day.
Cut this so I can have a secret weapon.
Exactly.
Nicole McNichols is a UW psychology professor. Great to talk to you. Thanks a lot again.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. If you're interested in the science of touch, follow Nicole on Instagram. She's at Nicole_the Sex Professor. Sonia Sheptonov produced today's show. Our production team is Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, Jenny Cecil Moore, Diana Opong, Clare McGrane, Matt Martin, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Paige Browning. See you tomorrow.